I think is absolutely a detriment to your business. You've got to be clear on who your customer is and who you want to look after and where you put your energy. And you've got to be okay to say no to the other people. And, the study that we've done is, and I've done a podcast on it before, is you know more for what you decline than what you accept. So when you say to someone, unfortunately, we don't do no gap glasses. This is what we are specializing. This is what we're known for. But a place where you can go for that is blah, 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 blah. I think people don't realize that the difference that makes to your psychology, your creativity, your drive, because you're much more focused on your strengths and where you're going.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au.
Show, welcome to the show. Really grateful to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've got a fantastic journey, and I'm really excited to explore it today, including everything that you've done and having inherited and made a great business in what you're doing down there in Camberwell. But I guess for the context of the audience, can you tell us about your journey? Tell us how it all came about, and I guess also what drew you into optometry in the first place.
Yeah, it's I've been blessed with my mum's eyes. I've actually got good eyes, so very, very thankful. But it meant that I didn't have that exposure to optometry as I was growing up. So, like most optometrists have sort of eye conditions, so they've had that exposure. For me, so I actually finished year 12 when I was 16. I was ready to rock and roll, go to uni. I was thinking, all right, I'm an adult now. I can take on the world. And, rightly so, my parents were sort of like, hey, I think you had a little bit more growing up to do before getting into that next phase. So I was very fortunate that they arranged for me to go through Rotary. I was awarded a Rotary exchange scholarship. And so I ended up going to Denmark. I actually lived in Denmark for a year after school. Wow. I ended up going to school there and doing things there. But, my main thing was that I set a language exam at the end of the year, and it was all about sort of the experience of the year. So during that year, it gave me a lot of time to kind of think about what I wanted to do with my life. One of the things I did know is that I definitely wanted to be around people. So love people, love having a chat, love hanging out, would not be the person that would get fulfillment out of sitting in front of in a room by myself or at a desk all day or be on spreadsheets all day and not be interacting and chatting with people. So I definitely knew I wanted to be around people. During school, loved the sciences, really enjoyed biology, chemistry, physics as much as you can, but I really loved the challenge and the complexity of all of that. So, and I knew I wanted to do something that was challenging. I like to be challenged. I don't want to get bored. So the human body is so complex. Everything we think we know now, gets completely disproved in another 5 years. It's a never-ending journey of learning and development. So I guess the last couple of things was I wanted to make money. So it's one that people don't like to often articulate because it's seen as not the way you're supposed to think. To make sure that I earned a good amount of, or was able to earn a good wage to be able to do the things I want to do, to be able to support my family. Fundamentally, there's a lot of things that rely on your ability to kind of pay for things. Be in an area where I make a difference to people. I like contributing to people. A lot of my mates were super duper passionate about medicine. And, my parents were like, were happy, would be keen if I did go that route, but they were also extremely supportive with whatever I chose. And there was just something about medicine that just didn't quite resonate with me, where optometry did. So I got into optometry, and then sort of graduated. So my first year out was 2008. So sort of almost 20 years in the industry. I got a scholarship to go down to Wellington and work in an independent practice there. So I was there for 2 years. My sister's always, like for decades, has lived in Melbourne. So during holiday time, during over summer, I would come over and absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved being over here. So I always kind of had an idea that I wanted to come over to Australia. So when I came over, it's been quite a ride. Like I worked in independent practices in Swan Hill, in Bundaberg, in Perth. I lived in Renmark, like northern rural South Australia. Actually stayed for 3 or 4 weeks in a haunted hotel there, which was quite an experience. That was crazy. Did a year actually. Sharon, my wife, and I lived in Charters Towers, which is about an hour and a half inland from Townsville, and that was quite an experience as well. That was like the massive gold mining boom area back in the day. But really sort of rural Queensland. So I ended up being sort of the local hospital actually ended up sending all of their emergency eye stuff to me, and then I triaged with the ophthalmologist in Townsville. So I ended up, it was an amazing experience in terms of the cases and what I had to look after. So it's been, I feel like I've gone around the world and back again. So I was at amazing practice in South Gold Coast at Vision Optical before the previous owner, Vision Camberwell, called me, Richard, and he said, "Look, I'm ready for you, and do you want to move and be my succession plan?" And that's what brought me back to Melbourne, and it'll be 10th of March will be 10 years.
Wow, coming up. So much to take out of that. A few things. I resonated with your point because as I've interviewed and spoken to people, on the podcast over the years, and I've spoken to a lot of newer optoms that have come out, and so often they say to me, I got into optometry because I had a condition. I went to the optometrist, and that's what got me into it. It's what made the industry known to me, and I've sort of wanted to do that ever since. So the fact that you have identified that you never had it, but obviously you've got good eyes to this point, it's almost like it was something else. And also the fact that you touch on the money component, I think that like you said, that's a really poignant point from the point of view of it being a really critical part of operations, and what so often what we do in the context of the optometry world from a business perspective is obviously financial. And as an optometrist coming into it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always see optometry students going into it with that I'll use the word noble, it might not be the right word, but the concepts of medicine and medical and being clinical. But when they step out, and part of what we're going to talk about is how you've been able to do this really well. When you step out of optometry school or wherever you've studied, there is a component to business that perhaps hasn't been addressed, and that's a really critical part, depending on the path you want to pursue. And then you're obviously so well traveled and so well exposed to different environments. And I'm assuming, and I guess we'll unpack this as the episode unfolds, a variety of corporate and independent style of businesses. You would have seen a lot of what worked and what didn't work, both in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously some experiences that you've had overseas as well. So I think there's a lot that we're going to be able to draw on. And I think, framing it in the way that you have has really set this up really nicely. So thank you for that. But can you speak to how you made that distinction and when you made that distinction, and I guess why you made that distinction as well?
I've always sort of gravitated towards independent style practices. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So look, I think, first of all, just to preface all of this, I think it's each to their own. I don't think one is good and one is bad. I think that there are definitely, in all industries, when you start to get corporate entities who are taking up market share, start to drive kind of where the overall profession is going. And I think that has consequences. And I think that's a different flavor. That's more of a sort of a philosophical long-term view of sort of, hey, what's optometry going to look like? I think for me, corporate optometry it's just a different vehicle. I think corporate and independent optometry are different vehicles. So they all have, they have a different ethic, they have a different moral, they have a different goals that, and with all of that, if you're in that model, you kind of end up in different places. I think that's where I'm getting at. So for me, I believe corporate optometry is built more for volume and numbers. So because they've gotten to a stage where they're bigger, it means that they've had to implement more systematic aspects, more processes, more policies. They have to look more at at figures, at statistics, and at the end of the day, we both want to make money, but the numbers kind of drive more of what happens in corporate optometry versus kind of the everyday work and individuality, like even as a staff member. So you are I think there's 3,500 optometrists at Specsavers, there's 2,500 staff members at OPSM. If you've got a machine that's that big, you have to have a lot of streamlined processes. And whatever the feeling is in that local practice, you're a much smaller cog, I guess, in this bigger machine. And so there's a pathway there that they prioritize, in my opinion, more sort of numbers and money, and they sacrifice other aspects of the profession in that pursuit of making more money and increasing volume. And for me, that just never resonated for me. I'm almost a little bit hippie-ish at heart. Like, again, I love making money, but I firmly believe I'm on this rock, like, for happiness. I want fulfillment. And it's also part of why I think medicine didn't resonate with me. I don't want to work all day, every day, and, not have that balance, not have a life. Like, I want to work, I want to enjoy it, I want to earn money. But then I also want to, outside of work, enjoy my life and do things and have hobbies and have time with my family and my friends and travel and have other pursuits. So for me, I believe independent optometry still has that it's a business. There's still number one aim is to make money. If you don't make money, you go out of business. I mean, that's just factual. But I believe that independent optometry still keeps that kind of those other values of, and also that other vibe of almost like a family practice, a family business type vibe. So there is a little bit more of a personal, there's motivation to look after that patient at an individual level, because your reputation actually counts for something a lot more. You hear about stories of, Bupa and things. As soon as a patient complains, they just give them their money back, give them a voucher, move on. And so it becomes a very much sort of, apathetic and very much process aspect. Whereas with independent optometry, it's a real person, you're dealing with that person and you want to do right by that person. You want to make money, but you also don't want to rip them off because, again, your reputation is much more valued and it's both good and bad. So I think you asked me when it kind of came to me, and to be honest, I don't really know. It's something that I've kind of instinctually always had. And so I kind of learned a bit about business and structures and philosophies. And again, it's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. They literally have different vehicles. And if you're in that vehicle, you actually end up in different places. And the frustrating part, I believe, I have, but I also think in the industry, is I get annoyed when they're clearly got different aims, but when corporate optometry talk a lot about how they're not about all that stuff, that's when it's very frustrating. Like, hey, just be straight. You guys are all about numbers. You guys are all about making money. You guys are about market share. Own it and do it. You guys are doing it well. But when you're kind of getting into wanting to be, provide the best clinical care for all patients, yeah.
Gotcha.
So I hope that answers that question.
And I guess if we can put that into context, if you can just speak briefly about your business now, obviously, you had a couple of experiences, and congratulations on the upcoming 10-year anniversary at Vision Camberwell. Tell us about Vision Camberwell. What's it about? Just contextually, as we sort of start to, continue on in the episode and start to ask you specifics about how you do things, and obviously that business mind and differentiation and all those other things. But tell us about the practice that you got down there in Melbourne.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so first of all, we're one of the oldest independent practices in the state. So first established 1951, and obviously gone through some hands, and we've now been at our physical premise now for about 40 years. I feel very privileged to have been chosen to kind of carry on that legacy. And this means that, you've got patients who have had corneal grafts older than I am, kind of thing. Like it's pretty cool. So quite a rich history, which is I've been fortunate enough to kind of take on a practice that already has got a lot of that. It has already sort of fostered a lot of those values in regards to sort of independent optometry. We don't bulk bill. It's all about communication. It's all about care. We don't, because we charge for our services, we're not pressured into having to sell. Again, like I believe in corporate models, their way of volume is by selling, and therefore they have to sell. I had a mate who graduated and went to started a corporate in New Zealand. And after 2 years, he was like, I'm done, I'm out. And I said, oh, how come, dude? And he said, look, like when you're selling cheeseburgers, you've got to sell a lot of cheeseburgers. And, again, when you talk like that with people who work in corporate optometry, they can get a little bit annoyed. But we're going to talk later about how, like, they're very good at doing it. It's just a different model. And that model is about volume. So it's nice to be able to kind of look after someone. It's nice to be able to spend time with someone. I'm talking about Vision Camberwell and the way we set up our practice. And then it's also, we're very transparent about our fees, so that you are paying for me, you're paying for the service, you're paying for the time. And then there's no need for the business to kind of have to sort of convert to a sale, because we're being sort of, there's reciprocation just with our service. So we've taken a lot of that sort of underlying philosophy and underlying sort of independent values, and we've just kind of built on it. So, my wife and I have really sort of fostered that in the practice. We often sometimes we even talk to our staff when we say, hey, look, like if someone walked into your house for a dinner party, like, how would you greet them? Oh, welcome. Like, can I get you anything? Do you want anything? Do you want to have a seat? All right, no problem. Like that kind of vibe is sort of what we're trying to create. And getting the right people is super important, like in terms of staff. But it kind of all sort of works for everyone, because then even the staff enjoy the environment because it's much more collegial, it's much more personal. They get valued as well. So yeah, we really foster that aspect of our practice and keep fostering that. There's that whole other side, I didn't touch on, which is clinical, which is, we are one of the top contact lens specialty practices in the state. All we do all day, every day is see specialty contact lenses. For 2 optometrists, we're seeing maybe 16, 17 patients with keratoconus or corneal grafts or specialty contact lenses a day. On top of that, we're seeing probably about 10 patients of Ortho-K. On top of that, an extra maybe 5 with myopia management. That's not Ortho-K. And then we also do general optometry as well. So, we're busy, living and breathing specialty contact lenses.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was definitely going to touch on, as we're sort of working into this, some influential figures that you'll work with in contact lenses, understanding how big a component of your business that is, and that's sort of throughout your early career and doing what you're doing now. Can you speak to that in some capacity? And also, what did you take away from those experiences that still influence how you practice today?
So I think one of the things would definitely be about pushing boundaries. So, when you are working with some pretty smart people and you're at the cutting edge and you are kind of going, hey, this thing, I wish we could make this thing better, or can we make this thing better? And it's just like, yes, let's go, let's try. So I think that sort of foundational sort of ethic of, hey, like boundaries are there to kind of be pushed and to break, is definitely, gone through with me in my development and my practice. And even now, sort of, when something is tricky, it's sort of like, hey, look, like we can still try it, we can still find a solution. I had posted a little bit, we did a pair of glasses that were, and this is just not just contact lenses, but we did a pair of glasses that were a plus 11 with a minus 20 sill. And, most people are just like, they can't manufacture that. And so, we got that done sort of overseas. We've had to get stuff done in Sweden. Yeah. So it's, and again, independent optometry allows you to do that. It allows you to find a solution that is unique for that person. So I think one of the biggest, apart from my foundational education and competency in specialty contact lenses, obviously that has a lot to do with that mentorship I had at the beginning. But I think that's sort of that thing of like, hey, like we can always do more. We can always push boundaries. They say you can't do that. Hey, look, maybe we can. I think that's definitely stayed with me and still with me.
And then said like a true independent. I mean, I think that's the essence of independence from the outset. It's that it's possible. How do we get it done? And let's figure out a way to do it. So I think that's really one of the key ingredients from that point of view. How did you get into specialty contact lenses? I mean, obviously you're using it in your practice as a differentiator. It's a point of difference. I mean, these concepts, specializations, whether it's myopia management, Ortho-K, behavioral optometry, all those type of aspects in independent practice are becoming more and more prevalent as we start to sort of branch away from general optometry. And it's something that you picked up on nice and early. How did you get into that? Is it something that you were just curious about initially? And what attracted you to that side of the business?
Yeah, maybe part of contact lenses is because, I don't wear glasses or contacts. So I think I remember that first Ortho-K. I think we had two 1 hour one hour lecture on Ortho-K at uni, back in 2005, 2006, 2007. But hey, like the closest thing to sort of laser surgery, right? Like closest thing to giving someone vision without anything. I've actually, because I've worked in so many independent practices, I've actually worked in sort of dry eye clinics and behavioral optometry clinics as well. So I have got some sort of, some experience and that I can talk to. And the biggest thing that I love about specialty contact lenses is that there's a much clearer definition of a successful solution. Mm-hmm. So, for example, dry eye, super complex. We often have the signs and the symptoms, not correlating. So you have someone, you see, a whole bunch of staining or MGD, and you have all of these clinical findings. You go through your process of treating them and doing IPL and this and that, and the ocular surface looks so much better. And that patient's just like, there's no difference. They're still struggling. They've still got the same symptoms, which is like really disheartening. Like you put a lot of time and effort and energy, and made a difference, but you haven't really subjectively made a difference. So I find that can be that is one thing that is tricky about dry eye disease, and I know that's where there's objective aspects to try and sort of quantify those improvements. And same thing with behavioral optometry. There are things that improve it, yes, but there are also other things that are more about, let's say, visual development. So you're doing something now that over years may come out, someone's grades may improve, was it that, was it not, what was that? Whereas with specialty contact lenses, sometimes it's as simple as, can they wear the contact lens? Are their eyes still remaining healthy? And are they 6'6"? I mean, at the end of the day, it can sometimes the result or the aim can be that simple. Often it's not. Often it's a lot about setting expectations about visual quality and managing this, that, and the other. But one thing I love about specialty contacts, you've got a keratoconic, you've got someone who's got distorted, blurry, shadowy, bleed vision. You put a contact lens on their eye. You do a fitting, you take them outside onto Burke Road, you get them to look, and you just watch their face, and they are just like, wow, is this what you see? Like it's incredible. Or you're like, hey, wow, look down the road, like, what can you see? And you turn and look at them, and they're literally just staring at the concrete.
Wow.
And you're like, you're good? And they're like, I didn't realize that concrete actually had texture. I thought it was just one color, and you're like, wow, like it really puts into perspective, like taking, what you take for granted, like having good vision. I've had people kind of just look at their arm, just keep staring at their arm, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize I had so much like hair on my arm. Like it's incredible, right? So I think what drew me towards specialty contact lenses is I like results. I like making a difference. I want to make people happy. Like I want to make a difference to them, for them, but I also get a lot of satisfaction out of it. No optometrist goes to work and goes, I want to try and find a solution for someone that doesn't work. We're all gutted. It could be it could be as simple as a pair of reading glasses. If it doesn't work and the patient's unhappy, it's not. No one goes to work and wants to not find successful solutions. So I think for me, especially contact lenses, is really great for that. You can really leaps and bounds. You can really provide some amazing solutions. And then it means that you can have a clear articulation, a clear definition of where we're heading. What is that endpoint? And then it means that, you're setting yourself up for more successful treatment programs. And so everyone wins from that.
Yeah. And I guess if I can get your take on the importance of specialization, or I know you think it is important, but the importance of it and why, I guess practices or optoms that haven't pursued that path yet, why they should. And I guess maybe directing it towards maybe the younger, as well as any optom that's interested in it, as to why there is such an important aspect of all of this and doing something that is a little bit different to just your general, refractive optics.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm going to talk about sort of the market at the moment, right? So majority of optometrists at the moment are corporate optometry. And corporate optometry, again, are very, 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 very good at getting patients who, your -1, your -2, you're sort of your everyday patients that just want to go in, they want a pair of glasses and they want to go out. So more of that sort of refractive type model. And let's talk a little bit about if you're going to compete with that kind of model, right? So we've got Specsavers, we've got OPSM, we've got Oscar Wilde. There's lots. I'm not singling one out, but for example, let's talk about Specsavers, right? So you've got a beast of a machine. Wow. If you would unemotionally take away again some of that philosophical stuff on the impact on the industry, and you just purely looked at it from a business point of view, what an absolute beast of a machine. Yeah. If you had, what are we talking about? 2025, almost $8 billion in revenue globally. Huge. Back in 2018, they spent over $60 million in marketing just in Australia. Wow. And that was in 2018. Imagine what it is now, right?
Jeez.
Right? And if you were captain of that ship, you would do all of the things that they are doing, because the aim is, in my opinion, is majority market share. The aim is volume. The aim is to flood the market globally, that optometry equals Specsavers. That is what they're doing. And they do it really, really well. They're on billboards, they're on trams, they're on the TV, they're in magazines, they're in paid advertising. They are everywhere and they're doing it really well. On top of that, they have done very well with infiltrating or getting into kind of more of the younger generation and the actual optometrists. So for example, in my third to last year, both OPSM and Specsavers came to us and said, hey, we will give you, if you sign up now, we will give you a signing bonus of, up to $5,000 cash. You have to work for us for 2 years and you get $75,000. As a new grad back in the mid 2000s, wow. How do you say no to that? And as an independent optometrist who's looking for a new grad, how do you compete with that? So they've gotten in there. We've now got in placements at university, you have corporate placement and independent placement. Again, I'm not saying this to whinge. I'm talking more from a business point of view, what they've done. Yeah. They advertise in Insight. They advertise in My Vision. Insight even every now and then has a Specsavers story. So they have a dedicated area where they talk about an optometrist at Specsavers. They've got into Reader's Digest, the most trusted optometrist in Australia. If you were driving that ship, wow, right? What a beast.
If you're doing a business case study, you're putting them up there with the very best of the businesses in the world with regards to how
for their aims. They have done well. And again, we can get into the philosophical aspect of what that's doing to the industry. But for now, we're just talking purely from independent, your question about differentiating. Yeah. So for corporate models, they do that by, first of all, beast, right? Beast. So as an independent practice, can you compete with it? If you really look at who your main competitors are, if you're going to be an optometrist who is going to be mostly a refractionist, who's going to try and do good optical deals, can you really compete with it? Like purely from a business point of view? And for me, I would say no.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Like if you really look at what they do, like, wow, they've done amazing at it. So I guess that's kind of the, not trying to get anyone depressed.
No.
Like you and I talked earlier about like that, we kind of saw this 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think only now optometrists are sort of going, okay, maybe there is some other consequences to sort of where the industry's going. But I guess the way I prefaced all of that is, okay, well, the thing though is that those models go for the majority of the population. And again, we're talking about that standardization, that systematic aspect, those policies and procedures. Because when those optometrists or those models get a curly one, get something different, get something outside, they don't have the solutions. They don't have the flexibility to be able to move and pivot, to be able to provide that. They're not as agile because they can't be, because it doesn't suit their model. So there's enough patience to go around. So I guess coming back to your question of how important is differentiating for independent optometry, I think it's fundamental, but I think it's been fundamental for well over a decade now, because you can't beat them, in my opinion, you can't beat them at their own game. I mean, they're finding it out, like I said, in terms of those numbers, in terms of those thousands and thousands of staff members at those top two, Essilor and Specsavers. You just can't compete at those levels or those numbers. So rather than try and play that game, you literally play a different game. And when you play a different game, when you change your mindset that is not your competitor anymore, it actually frees you up a lot more to be much more creative as to what is going to be your difference. Now, my difference is obviously specialty contact lenses, but it doesn't have to be that kind of obvious or that specialized. It could be related around, patient care, patient process. Like it just needs to be, what is it that you can do that's different to your refractionist, your main competitor? What area are you good at? So what patients can you provide solutions for that those people can't? And how do you then go, all right, how do you get those people to come to you because you can provide those solutions? Myopia management's another one that's coming out as well as sort of a differentiating aspect. But yeah, again, I don't think it needs to be as kind of black and white as, oh, okay, now I'm a dry eye specialist, or now I'm a behavioral specialist, or now I'm a contact lens specialist. Okay. It just needs to be, how do you provide different value to not the same but better? How do you provide something different that's of value to different patients? And then how do you get those patients to come to you?
Is it almost like tailoring the experience and I guess creating a unique experience for lack of a better term?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Creating a unique experience. And that unique experience for your practice and the unique experience for my practice are different. But that's what's great, because, the patients I want to get, the patients you want to get are different. Yeah. But they're not the same patients that want to go to, the corporate entities.
Yeah, it's a really powerful statement, and it's a really powerful way of thinking. And like you rightly put, if it's something that you can grasp, it does change the way you think about business in general and the way that you're going to approach your business. Because I totally agree with you. You're not competing. The Specsavers as an independent is not your competitor. And if you view them as your competitor, you're on basically a pathway to failure. And it's been tried and tested before. And there have been so many instances where I've seen independent practices actually work with the Specsavers, because they also know that they're different customers too, and they actually don't want to serve them necessarily. Now, some management at Specsavers might get upset with this potentially, but there are where they know the independent can do something that they can't, and so they've got and likewise, the independent knows that they can't offer a service to their customer or potential customer that they know Specsavers can. And I think when it works really well and you know who you're working towards, there is no issue being able to have a relationship like that.
There's no issue. Yeah. And look, we're the same. We've got 10 in the space of of just over a kilometre in Camberwell, there's 10 optometrists. Like it's crazy, and we have people who ask, do you bulk bill or do you have this offer or these types of offers? And we literally just say, look, absolutely, like, unfortunately, we don't, but we're absolutely happy to help. We can recommend down the road, these people are really, really great. Like we've also got a relationship with the Specsavers down the road. Like I know the owners of it. And, at the end of the day, like
that's the power of the
thinking. Yeah. And I also, when you said that, something actually like came to my mind. Like I had a mate who sort of, and again, like, no names or anything, but has a practice and he's actually a dispenser who is like really high end, like custom made frames and known for sort of that aspect. And one day we were sort of like chatting and we were talking about business and that kind of thing. And he was talking about a patient who wanted sort of a no gap hair. And he basically went into his no gap drawer. And I was fascinated about the I said, like, what's the deal? Like your brand is like the opposite.
Yeah.
So, like what's the deal? And he's like, well, I want to be able to offer something to every single person. And talking to him more and more, about it is, I think that trying to cover all bases, I think is absolutely a detriment to your business. You've got to be clear on who your customer is and who you want to look after and where you put your energy. And you've got to be okay to say no to the other people. And, part of the study that we've done is, and I've done a podcast on it before, is you're known more for what you decline than what you accept. So when you say to someone, do you know what, like unfortunately, like we don't do no gap glasses. This is what we are specializing. This is what we're known for. But a place where you can go for that is blah, 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 blah. You're actually like, I think people don't realize that the difference that makes to your psychology, your creativity, your drive, because you're much more focused on your strengths and where you're going. And even though you might go, it's just a drawer that's in the, down there in the side, that drawer is still taking up physical and mental space. Yeah. You're still thinking of, okay, when I'm implementing something, I've still got this philosophy of, but as much as I do that, I still want to look after the no gap glasses. Yeah. So, yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of people in that space, and there are people probably listening to this that go, I'm really a practice like that, or I'm a part of a practice like that, where we try to cater. And you know what, like you've said early on, there's no such thing as right or wrong. Everyone has
Correct.
a way. And what I love about what you've done is you seem to have gone to that complete extreme, and I think that's a really positive and a good thing. And I think even if people can take elements of that and start to incorporate that into the way that they're thinking, it might change their perspective on how they approach things. Because I guess in context with all of this, the corporates as they currently exist now, and we've spoken about a few of them, it wasn't until the late sort of 2000, as you were coming out of uni, really, 2009, 10, 11, 12, that they all sort of came into play. Now, the reality is a lot of the business owners, that were there then have really been there up until maybe the last 5 years where they've started to retire. But someone like yourself has come in and the boys had them there as a competitor and have had to think. And most importantly, the unis now, and we have some dealings with the universities and we speak to the students and we understand their pains. Now, something that's happened in the industry is there's been an influx of universities that offer optometry, right? And so I know a lot of the students now that are really worried because they aren't necessarily getting that $5,000 cash bonus you spoke of. They're actually not getting placement at all. And what it's doing is it's creating an interesting dynamic where a lot of them are becoming curious about independent business because they're not being consumed by the corporate optom, space as they once were because of all of these, colleges, universities that are coming through with the offerings. But it does highlight that need for specialization, differentiation. And I think you've spoken to that really well and explained it, not just necessarily why it's important, but the mentality of how it can be important and how, as a movement type of, I guess, thing, item, people need to really be considering this. So I really love that. But if we bring it back to some relativity, let's say you're a student listening to this, or you're a young optom, or you're into your career, and you're like, I want to do something like this. How would you recommend somebody start off? Like, what are some of the first steps? Is it as simple as identifying, some CPD, programs that offer it, and then that, what would you say to somebody that's looking at trying to get into a specialization? How would they pick it? What would they do? And I guess what would be some of the next steps in general?
The first thing I'll say, and I think it's across the board, is that it's really hard. It's really hard because, our subspecialties are all unofficial.
Yeah.
And I know that OA are working on that and they're working at, recognition, but, fundamentally there is no subspecialty. We're all optometrists and we're all equal in the eyes of, our qualification and that aspect. So it does make it extremely, extremely difficult. I get it asked all the time, like, how do I get into it? How do I get better at it? I'm the chair of the fellowship program for the International Academy of Myopia Control and Ortho-K, right? So I get people asking all the time, like, I want to do more. How do I do it? How do I learn? And it is very tricky. So I know in contact lenses, you can do things like you could do the advanced certification with the ACO, certification advanced contact lenses. So at least you kind of have some bit more of structured foundation for sort of the theory behind sort of contact lenses. And there is some sort of practical components as well. And I know the other specialties, behavioral ACPO and things, they have things like that, or ACO have things with behavioral optometry as well. However, I believe that all of our subspecialties are almost like apprenticeships. So really, it's a matter of finding a practice that already does it and hopefully has a great teacher, mentor, and that you end up being taught and mentored, as you're working. And look, that was like my journey. Right from uni, I knew I wanted to specialize in contact lenses. And also part of the move to Australia was that there were more opportunities to get to one of the best contact lens practices. Whereas, New Zealand, there was only sort of one or two in Auckland and one or two in Wellington. And literally, because I had that goal in mind, I was able to be patient and wait for the opportunity to arise because I knew I wanted it. And I had already a little bit of general optometry underneath my belt. So, it really was a strategic plan to do that. So yeah, and again, it's not trying to be disheartening. Like it is a question I get asked all the time, and I do think it's actually very, very tricky.
Yeah.
You've just got to connect with practices that already do it, and then be patient. Yeah, and in the meantime, maybe do some of these other studies so that you can start to build up some experience, some theory. There's also things, like conferences. So if you go to the CCLSA conference, ICCLC, you're going to the lectures, but also going to the workshops. So we're doing a lot more workshops with the CCLSA. We're doing a lot more workshops with the OSO. So you can go to the OSO workshops and at conference, and they've got beginners boot camps and advanced boot camps, so you can actually get some hands-on practical components as well.
Yeah. And we'll put those links in the show notes too of those conferences that you mentioned, just if anyone wants to
Cool.
check them
Thank
out.
you.
I guess when we're tying that all together, but for the aspect of specialization. And, something that we've touched on earlier, which is, I guess the commercial reality of running a practice. I hear instances of people getting too focused on the clinical component of all of this. And obviously, as we know in our industry, it's the conversion of a sale. And this is why some of the corporates do so well, because they are so focused on that. But how do you bridge that gap with regards to being a clinical specialist, but then also ensuring that the commercial realities of running a practice aren't being neglected?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is the schedule. So managing my appointment book. So we have, for example, in the middle of the morning, middle of the afternoon, we actually have a little slot there where there's no patients booked in. And even lunchtime, we have longer lunches. So, at the moment, my optometrist and my senior optom, Ju Wang, so him and I do have an hour of lunch as well. And then even though I work 5 days a week, I'm actually only consulting sort of 4 to 4.5, depending on the time. So to be able to allocate time to the business. And also on top of that, I have a set sort of weekly meeting with my practice manager. So that, again, we're sort of constantly tending to and managing the commercial side or the business side. So in doing so, I have enabled or tried to tend to having enough time to be able to look after patients and also be able to, manage my workload. Because the thing with specialty contacts is you might spend half an hour with a patient, but then especially if it's a super complex patient, you might end up spending another 10, if it's a really complicated case, another 10 minutes to 15 minutes assessing and redesigning those lenses. So, that could be just one complex case. So you've got to factor in, like, as you said, like the clinical side, you don't want to shortchange that aspect. So it means that we've had to make sure that our appointment book is set up so that we can, to win, so that we can get that stuff done and do it well. But then you can hear that if you're kind of going, oh, jeepers, you're having a break you have a gap in the morning, you have a gap in the afternoon, you have a longer lunch. I've had optometrists where they tell me they literally booked up from start to end with a 30-minute gap, and that's it. No, not even, like, there's a lot of complaints at the moment of job like burnout, not even time for admin. So I think setting the practice up for the appointment book, the schedule for the clinical side, then also has to be, I guess, balanced with appropriate billing, appropriate charging. Because again, the practice has to make money to continue to grow and to survive and invest in new tech and, look after patients. So then there's the more complicated aspect, which is, okay, well, if I'm doing that, if I'm spending only X amount of consulting hours and then, what is the appropriate fair, billing, so that we're being fair to patients, but also, the practice is being remunerated appropriately. So I think it's that kind of balance.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a critical component of it all. And I think you've summarized it quite well there. And what you've started to touch on leads quite nicely into I guess the next category or next area that I want to talk to you about, which is, broadly speaking, leadership, team and culture. And it seems like a word that you've used and something that's come to my mind a lot as you've been speaking is strategy. You're being very strategic in what you're doing. There's a plan. You're working towards something, and that's all been things that you've developed and learned. And you've mentioned your team. So I guess for the context, how you've said 2 optometrists that you've that.
Yep.
And how big is the team?
Yep. So,
from a numbers point of view, if you're happy to disclose that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're two full-time optometrists, and we've got 2 full-time staff, and that's it. So we're open Monday to Friday.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So
you've said you look.
Apologies.
Sorry, go for that.
No, I was going to say, we used to be open Saturdays,
Right.
but, again, for balance and balancing life for now, like Monday to Friday. But yeah, so at the moment there's that. And then my wife has a previous life in HR and business and finance.
Okay.
So she's also the powerhouse behind the machine.
Okay.
In regards to, stats, bookkeeping, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So, in practice, there's 4 of us full time, 2 optoms, 2 support staff. And then we've got Sharon, who's also behind the scenes.
And I think that seems to be, that would be something that's relatively, I guess, common across the industry with regards to independence. But, you touched on Saturday briefly as well there, and the fact that you don't do Saturdays. And I think it speaks to one of the benefits of being an independent. So you can make the choice, whether you do or don't do that. And maybe it's a choice that you can't make all the time, but you can work towards that choice depending on your circumstances.
Correct.
So that you can get to that point in the future. And having the plan, having the strategy, knowing that's something that's important to you, I think, again, highlights that instance. So with your team, and I know something that we've discussed in the past is that, and even as you speak about your breaks and being mindful about when, you're being able to focus on the business as well as working in the business, you've said you look after your staff. So, and if you look after your staff in turn, they'll look after your patients, and the patients will then look after the business. So I guess from that point of view, and speaking about the team, how does that look like?
Yeah. So one of my fundamental philosophies in life, like, really resonates with me is reciprocation. So, I firmly believe that the best way to win in life is when everyone's winning, and I think that goes back to back in the day when, if we helped each other out, we didn't get killed by a saber-toothed tiger kind of thing. So for me, that is staff to staff, that's staff to patient, that's owner to staff, that's owner to patient, that fundamental philosophy of sort of reciprocation. So my thing is, if I look after my staff, so we all know, if you've got a staff member who's happy, who's fulfilled, in general, they're going to be much more productive than someone who is resentful, who's unhappy in their role. And as much as people think that they can fake it, like, fundamentally human beings, we're moody. Sometimes it can be hard to manage mood. We also pick up on, a lot of other cues. And so if that staff member is happy and is fulfilled, they're going to be more willing to kind of go that extra mile. They're going to be willing to do that little bit extra for that patient, or, listen a little bit more to that patient, genuinely want to look after that. There's more authenticity in wanting to look after that person. It's not like hi, how are you? Like, you can tell when it's like, oh, hey, how are you? Like, they're the same words, but the whole kind of mood and the whole energy is different. And the best way to keep that consistent over time is that if the staff are, more happy and fulfilled, And so I find that if someone is more happy and fulfilled, like a staff member, and more genuinely wanting to look after a patient, there's a higher probability that the patient is going to feel value, like we said, have that different experience, that differentiating experience, and then be more willing to reciprocate and either book in, this could be just over the phone and talking to them about our fees and what we do and how we're different and how we look after you. This could be, a pair of glasses, or could be contact lens program. So in general, I believe that, if that patient feels that genuine experience, then they're going to be more willing to sort of reciprocate and actually do business with us. And when they do business with us, the business reaps the rewards. And then we have structured our business so that when the business reaps the rewards, the staff also reap the rewards. And again, that is, money talks, and I'm sure we're going to talk a bit more about money, and fundamentally money talks, but that's not always the reciprocation. That's not the only thing, and that's where you get into individuality also of staff. And, that could be, it could be an acknowledgement. It could be that, that patient has gone, holy moly, I've never had a receptionist or a staff member look after me like they have. Please say thank you. And like, you pass that on, and it's like, wow, like the fulfillment. And so that's kind of like the fundamental philosophy, because as a clinician, I will always look after staff, after patients. Like, it's just who I am. I love chatting. I love caring. I like making an effort. I'm a type A, like a high achiever. I like kicking goals, getting amazing results. That thing I can do, I know that if I concentrate and I also make sure that that my staff are valued, then when I'm not there, they're also looking after the patients as well, and looking and following in sort of our ethics and our values.
Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.